A chill ran down the spine of the passerby, who stumbled upon the lifeless body of a man on Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia. It was December 1, 1948, and the sun had barely risen over the horizon. The man, estimated to be in his mid-40s, was lying on his back, with his head resting on a bundle of clothes. He was fully dressed with a suit, tie, and even a pocket watch, but there was no identification on him. As the police arrived, they began to process the scene, taking note of the peculiar details surrounding the body. The man's eyes were open and his face was expressionless, with no signs of struggle or trauma. But what caught the attention of the investigators was the small, hidden pocket in the man's trousers, containing a cryptic code that would set off a chain of events in the quest to uncover the truth behind the mysterious death. But who was this man, and what led him to this isolated beach on that fateful morning? And then the detectives saw it, a small piece of paper in the man's pocket with the words Taman Shud printed on it, which would become the only clue to the man's identity. The investigation was just beginning, but the questions were already piling up. To understand the events that led to the mysterious death on Somerton Beach, we need to go back to the days and weeks preceding the discovery of the body. Adelaide, the capital city of South Australia, was a bustling metropolis with a population of over 300,000 people. It was a time of post-war prosperity, with the city experiencing a period of rapid growth and development. The streets were filled with people going about their daily business, unaware of the events that were about to unfold. The man who would later be found dead on the beach was likely one of these people, living a normal life with a job, a family, and friends. But what drove him to leave his life behind and end up on that isolated beach? The answer, when it finally came, was worse than anyone imagined. As we delve deeper into the case, we will examine the events that led up to the man's death and the investigation that followed, which would reveal a complex web of clues and theories. But for now, let's take a step back and look at the city and the people who lived there to try to understand the context in which this mystery unfolded. The city was a vibrant, thriving place, full of life and energy, with a strong sense of community and a growing economy. But beneath the surface, there were also signs of tension and unrest, which would later become relevant to the investigation. And then on the evening of November 30, 1948, the man was seen on the beach by a couple who were walking along the shore, who reported that he was sitting on a rock, staring out to sea in a contemplative mood. The year 1948 was a significant one for Australia, as the country was still recovering from the effects of World War II. The war had left its mark on the nation, with many young men having fought and died on foreign soil. The country was also experiencing a period of rapid immigration, with many people from Europe and other parts of the world arriving in Australia, seeking a new life. The city of Adelaide was no exception, with a growing population and a thriving economy. The government, led by Prime Minister Ben Chifley, was focused on rebuilding the country and providing for the needs of its citizens. But beneath the surface, there were also signs of tension and unrest, as the country struggled to come to terms with its new place in the world. The Cold War was beginning to take shape, and Australia was caught up in the middle, with the United States and the Soviet Union vying for influence in the region. It was a complex and uncertain time, with many Australians feeling anxious about the future. And then on December 1, 1948, the body of the unknown man was found on Somerton Beach, which would set off a chain of events that would captivate the nation and leave a lasting impact on Australian history. The investigation that followed would reveal a complex web of clues and theories, which would take detectives on a journey across the country and into the darkest corners of human nature. The initial discovery of the body was made by a passerby who stumbled upon the lifeless form of the man on Somerton Beach. The police were called, and soon the area was cordoned off as detectives began to process the scene. The first sign of something unusual was the lack of identification on the body, which seemed strange given that the man was fully dressed and had a pocket watch on him. The detectives also found a small, hidden pocket in the man's trousers, containing a cryptic code, which would later become a central part of the investigation. As the police continued to examine the body, they found a few more clues, including a cigarette packet and a box of matches, but nothing that seemed to point to the man's identity or the circumstances of his death. The investigation was still in its early stages, but the detectives were already faced with a number of questions, which would only deepen as they delved deeper into the case. The mystery of the unknown man had begun to unfold, and it would take the detectives on a journey across the country and into the darkest corners of human nature. And then, as they were about to leave the scene, one of the detectives noticed something that would change the course of the investigation: a small piece of paper in the man's pocket with the words Taman Shud printed on it. The investigation into the death of the unknown man began in earnest, with detectives from the Adelaide Police Department working to uncover the truth behind the mysterious circumstances. The first priority was to identify the man and to determine the cause of his death. The police canvassed the area, talking to locals and showing them the man's photograph, but no one seemed to recognize him. The detectives also began to examine the clues they had found, including the cryptic code and the cigarette packet, but so far they had not been able to crack the code or find any lights on the man's identity. As the investigation continued, the police began to receive reports of a man matching the description of the unknown man being seen in the area on the days leading up to his death. But these reports were inconsistent, and the police were not sure what to make of them. The investigation was escalating, and the police were under pressure to find answers, but so far, they had not been able to make any significant progress. And then the detectives received a call from a local hotel, reporting that a man matching the description of the unknown man had stayed there on the night of November 30, 1948, which would lead them to a new set of clues and a deeper understanding of the mystery. As the investigation continued, new clues began to emerge, which would shed more light on the mystery of the unknown man. The police received a report from a local taxi driver who claimed to have picked up a man matching the description of the unknown man on the night of November 30, 1948. The taxi driver reported that the man had been dropped off at the beach, where the body was later found. The police were also able to track down the owner of the cigarette packet which had been found on the body, and they discovered that it had been purchased at a local shop just a few days before the man's death. The investigation was escalating, and the police were starting to piece together the events of the man's final days. But despite these new leads, the police were still not able to identify the man or determine the cause of his death. The mystery was deepening, and the police were under increasing pressure to find answers. And then the detectives received a call from a mysterious woman who claimed to have information about the man's identity, which would lead them down a new path of inquiry and raise more questions than answers. The call from the mysterious woman would prove to be a pivotal moment in the investigation, as it led the detectives down a new path of inquiry. The woman claimed to have known the man and to have information about his identity, but she was reluctant to come forward and to share her story. The detectives were able to persuade her to meet with them, and she revealed that the man's name was George and that he had been a soldier who had served in the war. The woman also claimed that George had been involved in some shady dealings and that he had been in fear for his life in the days leading up to his death. The detectives were skeptical of the woman's story, but they were also intrigued, and they decided to investigate further. They began to look into George's past and to talk to people who had known him, but they were not able to find any concrete evidence to support the woman's claims. The investigation was at a crossroads, and the detectives were not sure which way to turn. But then they received a new lead, which would take them in a completely different direction and raise more questions than answers. As the detectives delved deeper into the case, they began to uncover a complex web of clues and theories which would take them on a journey across the country and into the darkest corners of human nature. They discovered that George had been involved in a number of shady dealings, including espionage and smuggling, and that he had been in fear for his life in the days leading up to his death. The detectives also found evidence of a possible connection to the Cold War and the involvement of foreign agents, which would raise more questions than answers. The investigation was becoming increasingly complex, and the detectives were struggling to keep up with the new leads and the latest developments. but they were determined to uncover the truth and to bring justice to the family of the unknown man. And then they received a new piece of evidence, which would change the course of the investigation and lead them to a surprising conclusion. As the investigation continued, the detectives began to learn more about the family of the unknown man and the impact that his death had had on them. They discovered that the man had a wife and 2 children who had been left behind and were struggling to come to terms with the loss of their loved one. The detectives also found out that the family had been living in poverty and that the man's death had left them without a breadwinner and in a desperate situation. The investigation was not just about solving a mystery, but also about bringing justice and closure to the family who had been affected by the man's death. The detectives were determined to do everything they could to help the family and to bring them the answers they so desperately needed. And then they received a call from the family with a new lead which would take them on a new journey and raise more questions than answers. As the detectives delved deeper into the case, they began to uncover a web of deceit and cover-ups which would lead them to question everything they thought they knew about the investigation. They discovered that there had been a number of inconsistencies and contradictions in the evidence, and that some of the key witnesses had been lying or withholding information. The detectives were faced with a daunting task as they tried to separate fact from fiction and to uncover the truth behind the mysterious death. The investigation was becoming increasingly complex, and the detectives were struggling to keep up with the new leads and the latest developments. But they were determined to uncover the truth and to bring justice to the family of the unknown man. And then they received a new piece of evidence, which would change the course of the investigation and lead them to a surprising conclusion. The detectives were determined to follow the trail and to uncover the truth behind the mysterious death. They began to investigate the various leads and to talk to the key witnesses and suspects. The investigation was becoming increasingly complex, and the detectives were struggling to keep up with the new leads and the latest developments. But they were determined to uncover the truth and to bring justice to the family of the unknown man. As they delved deeper into the case, they began to uncover a complex web of clues and theories which would take them on a journey across the country and into the darkest corners of human nature. The investigation was a marathon, not a sprint, and the detectives were in it for the long haul. And then they received a new lead, which would take them to a surprising location and raise more questions than answers. As the detectives continued to investigate, they began to uncover a number of misleading clues and false leads, which would take them down a number of blind alleys. They discovered that some of the key witnesses had been lying or withholding information, and that some of the evidence had been tampered with or fabricated. The detectives were faced with a daunting task as they tried to separate fact from fiction and to uncover the truth behind the mysterious death. The investigation was becoming increasingly complex, and the detectives were struggling to keep up with the new leads and the latest developments. But they were determined to uncover the truth and to bring justice to the family of the unknown man. And then they received a new piece of evidence, which would change the course of the investigation and lead them to a surprising conclusion. After months of investigation, the detectives were finally able to piece together the most likely explanation for the mysterious death. They discovered that the unknown man had been involved in a number of shady dealings, and that he had been in fear for his life in the days leading up to his death. The detectives also found evidence of a possible connection to the Cold War and the involvement of foreign agents, which would raise more questions than answers. The investigation had been a complex and challenging one, but the detectives were finally able to bring some closure to the family of the unknown man. The case would remain one of the most intriguing and baffling in Australian history, but the detectives had done their best to uncover the truth. And then, as they were closing the case, they received a new lead, which would raise more questions than answers and leave the detectives with a sense of unease and uncertainty. The final revelation in the case of the unknown man was a shocking one, and it would leave the detectives and the family with a sense of unease and uncertainty. The detectives discovered that the man's death had been just one part of a much larger conspiracy, and that there were still many unanswered questions and unresolved issues. The case would remain one of the most intriguing and baffling in Australian history, and the detectives would never be able to fully uncover the truth. The investigation had been a complex and challenging one, but the detectives had done their best to bring some closure to the family of the unknown man. And as they closed the case, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets and mysteries lay hidden and unsolved in the shadows of history. The truth behind the unknown man's death would remain a mystery, but the investigation would always be remembered as one of the most intriguing and baffling cases in Australian history. The case of the unknown man will always be remembered as one of the most intriguing and baffling cases in Australian history. The investigation was a complex and challenging one, but the detectives did their best to uncover the truth and to bring some closure to the family of the unknown man. The case will always be a reminder of the complexities and mysteries of human nature and the importance of seeking justice and truth. If this kept you up at night, subscribe. We post dark history every week.